The bullet grazed her shoulder as she stumbled through the darkness, tearing through the fabric of her worn traveling dress and leaving a trail of crimson that she could not afford to stop and tend. Sarah Fletcher ran harder than she had ever run in her life, her lungs burning with each desperate breath as she pushed through the scrub brush and mesquite trees that dotted the Arizona landscape. Behind her, the shouts of the men grew more distant, but she knew better than to slow down. They would not give up easily, not after what she had witnessed. The year was 1883, and the desert night was unforgiving. Sarah had been traveling with a merchant caravan heading west from Tucson when they had stopped for the night near a small creek. She had wandered a short distance from camp to wash her face when she heard the gunshots. By the time she crept back to see what had happened, the entire caravan lay dead, murdered by a gang of outlaws who were rifling through the wagons for valuables. She had watched in horror as the leader, a scarred man with cruel eyes, counted out gold coins while standing over the body of the kind merchant who had given her safe passage. One of the horses had nickered at her presence, and suddenly 6 pairs of eyes had turned in her direction. She ran before they could even raise their weapons, but that did not stop them from trying. The moon was barely a sliver in the sky, which had saved her life so far, but it also meant she could barely see where she was going. Sarah crashed through a dry wash, nearly twisting her ankle on loose stones, and scrambled up the other side. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins hours ago and now whipped around her face, catching on thorns and branches. She had lost her bonnet somewhere in the first mile, and her hands were cut and bleeding from shoving through the brush. She did not know where she was running to, only what she was running from. The outlaws had horses, and once dawn came, they would track her down easily enough. Her only hope was to find shelter, somewhere to hide or someone who could help her. But out here in the vast expanse of the Arizona territory, such hope seemed foolish. Just when Sarah thought her legs would give out entirely, when her vision began to blur from exhaustion and blood loss, she crested a small rise and saw it. Down in the valley below, illuminated by the first pale hints of dawn, stood a ranch house. It was not grand, but it was well built, with a sturdy barn and several outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, which meant someone was home. Sarah half ran, half stumbled down the slope, using the last of her strength to reach the wooden gate that marked the property line. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the latch, and then she was staggering up the dirt path toward the house. She made it to the porch steps before her knees buckled. The front door opened before she hit the ground. Strong hands caught her, and Sarah found herself looking up into the face of a man who appeared to be in his late 20s. He had dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of sage in summer. His jaw was strong and covered with several days' worth of stubble, and concern creased his weathered features. "Please," Sarah gasped, clutching at his shirt. "Please help me. They are coming." The man did not hesitate. He swept her up into his arms as though she weighed nothing and carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. Sarah was aware of being placed on a sofa, of gentle hands examining her wounded shoulder, of a deep voice calling out for someone named Miguel. "You are safe now," the man said, his voice low and steady. "No one is going to hurt you here. I am Isaac Xanders, and this is my ranch. Can you tell me your name?" "Sarah," she managed before the world began to spin. "Sarah Fletcher." "Well, Miss Fletcher, you have lost some blood, but the wound is not deep. I need to clean it and bandage it. This is going to hurt." Sarah nodded, biting her lip as Isaac carefully peeled away the torn fabric of her dress. She watched his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his eyes, the gentle competence of his movements. This was a man who had dealt with injuries before, An older Mexican man appeared with clean cloths and a basin of water. He took one look at Sarah and crossed himself, muttering a prayer. Isaac spoke to him in fluent Spanish, too quickly for Sarah to follow with her limited knowledge of the language, and Miguel nodded before hurrying away again. "Miguel has been with me for 5 years," Isaac explained as he cleaned the wound. "He is going to keep watch and make sure we are not followed. Now, tell me who did this to you and why they are coming." Sarah told him everything, the words tumbling out between gasps of pain as he worked on her shoulder. She told him about the caravan, about the murders, about the outlaws and their leader with the scar across his left cheek. Isaac's jaw tightened as she spoke. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, securing the bandage with careful precision. "That sounds like Dutch Marlowe's gang," he said finally. "They have been terrorizing travelers on the Tucson Road for months. The law cannot seem to catch them because they know this territory too well." He met her eyes, and Sarah saw steel in his gaze. "But they will not find you here. I give you my word." "You do not even know me," Sarah whispered. "Why would you risk yourself?" Isaac stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lightening sky. "Because 5 years ago, when I first came to this land with nothing but a horse and a dream, a stranger took me in and gave me a chance. Old Tom Brennan owned this ranch then, and he taught me everything about raising cattle and working this hard land. When he died, he left it all to me because he had no family of his own." He turned back to her. "He taught me that out here, we take care of each other. That is just what decent people do." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back. She had not cried through the whole terrible night, but this simple act of kindness threatened to undo her completely. Miguel returned and spoke urgently in Spanish. Isaac nodded and replied, then looked at Sarah. "Miguel says there are riders on the ridge to the north, 6 of them. That matches the number you mentioned." Sarah's heart lurched with fear. "They found me. They found your trail," Isaac corrected. "That does not mean they are going to find you." He pulled a rifle down from above the fireplace and checked that it was loaded. "Miguel, take Miss Fletcher to the root cellar. She can hide there." "No," Sarah said, trying to stand despite the dizziness that washed over her. "I will not let you face them alone because of me. If they see I am not here, maybe they will leave." Isaac's expression softened. "Miss Fletcher, men like Dutch Marlowe do not leave witnesses, and they do not leave empty-handed. If they come to my door, we are going to have trouble whether you are standing in plain sight or hidden away. But if you are hidden, at least I know you are safe, and I can focus on dealing with them." The logic was sound, even if Sarah hated it. She allowed Miguel to help her to her feet and guide her through the kitchen to a narrow door that led down into a cool, dark space beneath the house. It smelled of earth and stored vegetables, and Miguel settled her on a wooden crate before pressing a small pistol into her hands. "Just in case, señorita," he said gently. "You know how to use this?" Sarah nodded. Her father had taught her to shoot before he died. Miguel squeezed her uninjured shoulder and climbed back up the stairs, closing the door above her in the darkness. Sarah listened. She heard boots on the floorboards above, heard the front door open, heard voices. Isaac's voice was calm and steady, and another voice responded, rougher and edged with menace. She could not make out the words, but the tone was clear enough. They were threatening him. The conversation went on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Sarah's hands tightened on the pistol, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard through the floorboards. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of a door being kicked in, wood splintering, and suddenly gunfire erupted. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. The shots were deafening even through the floor, quick bursts followed by shouts and the sound of breaking glass. She counted the shots, trying to track what was happening. 3, 4, 5. A pause. Then 2 more. Then silence. The silence was somehow worse than the gunfire. Sarah waited, barely breathing, the pistol raised toward the cellar door. If the outlaws came through that door, she would shoot. She would not go down without a fight. Footsteps approached the door. One set, heavy and deliberate. The door opened and light spilled down the stairs. "Miss Fletcher, it is over. You can come up now." Isaac's voice. Sarah nearly sobbed with relief. She set the pistol down with shaking hands and climbed the stairs, emerging into chaos. The interior of the ranch house looked like a war zone. Furniture was overturned, a window was shattered, and there were bullet holes in the walls. But Isaac was standing, apparently unharmed except for a cut on his cheek. Miguel was tying up 2 men who sat on the floor, their faces bloody and defeated. "The others?" Sarah asked. "Dead or run off," Isaac said shortly. "These 2 are going to stand trial in Goldfield. Dutch Marlowe himself got away, unfortunately, but without his gang, he is not much of a threat." Sarah looked at the bound men and recognized one of them as the man who had shot at her. She felt no pity, only a deep exhaustion that settled into her bones. Isaac seemed to sense this. He guided her back to the sofa, which had survived the gunfight relatively unscathed. "You need to rest. Miguel and I will clean this up and take these men to the sheriff come morning. You are safe now." "You keep saying that," Sarah said, and she was dismayed to hear her voice crack. "But I do not even know what safe means anymore." Isaac knelt in front of her, his eyes searching her face. "It means you do not have to run. It means you do not have to be afraid. It means you have a place to stay for as long as you need it." "I have no money to pay you," Sarah said. "The caravan was carrying everything I owned in this world. I was traveling to California to meet my cousin. She married a shopkeeper in Sacramento, and when my father died 6 months ago, she wrote to say I could come live with her family. But now you are here," Isaac said. "And that is enough for today. Tomorrow we will figure out the rest." Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to protest that she could not possibly impose on his kindness any further. But the truth was she had nowhere else to go. So she simply nodded and let Miguel fuss over her, bringing her water and a blanket while Isaac dragged the bound outlaws outside to lock them in the barn. She must have fallen asleep, because the next thing she knew, bright sunlight was streaming through the windows, and she could hear the sound of hammering outside. Sarah sat up carefully, testing her wounded shoulder. It ached fiercely, but the bleeding had stopped. She found Isaac on the porch, nailing boards over the broken window. He had changed his shirt and washed the blood from his face, and in the morning light, Sarah could see him more clearly. He was tall and lean, with the kind of strength that came from hard physical work. His hands were calloused and capable, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he moved. "You should be resting," he said when he noticed her. "I have rested enough," Sarah replied. "I am not accustomed to lying about while others work." Isaac set down his hammer and studied her. "Your shoulder needs time to heal." "My shoulder will heal whether I am sitting or standing. Please let me help. I need to feel useful." Something in her tone must have convinced him because he nodded slowly. "All right, but nothing strenuous. Miguel is making breakfast. You could help him with that if you are feeling up to it." Sarah found Miguel in the kitchen, which was surprisingly well organized for a household of men. He greeted her warmly and set her to slicing bread, a task she could manage one-handed well enough. As they worked together, Miguel told her about the ranch. "Señor Isaac, he is a good man," Miguel said, stirring a pot of beans on the stove. "When he came here, he had nothing, but he worked hard and he treated everyone with respect. Old Señor Brennan, he saw that. He saw that Isaac had honor." "How did Señor Brennan die?" Sarah asked. Miguel's weathered face grew sad. His heart, it was very quick. He did not suffer, but Isaac, he took it hard. Brennan was like a father to him after his own family. He trailed off, shaking his head. That is not my story to tell. Sarah did not press, but she found herself curious about the man who had saved her life. What had brought him to this remote corner of Arizona? What had he lost? Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair of beans, bacon, and fresh bread. Isaac ate with the focused efficiency of a man who had work to do, and after the meal, he and Miguel prepared to take the captured outlaws to Goldfield. "The ride is about 3 hours," Isaac told Sarah. "We should be back by evening. Will you be all right here alone?" Sarah bristled slightly at the implication that she could not take care of herself, but then she reminded herself that he was only being considerate. "I will be fine. I can manage the house while you are gone, perhaps do some cleaning." Isaac looked like he wanted to argue, but Miguel caught his eye and shook his head slightly. "Thank you, Miss Fletcher. That would be kind of you." After they left, Sarah stood in the middle of the battle-damaged parlor and took stock. The place was not dirty exactly, but it had the look of a home where the occupants were too busy with outside work to pay much attention to details. There were dust on the shelves, the curtains needed washing, and the floors could use a good scrubbing. Moving carefully to avoid straining her shoulder, Sarah set to work. She found cleaning supplies in a cupboard and started with the broken glass, sweeping it up and disposing of it safely. Then she tackled the bullet holes in the walls, stuffing them with rags for now. Proper repair would have to wait, but at least they were less noticeable. She washed the windows that remained intact, beat the dust from the curtains, and scrubbed the floors until they gleamed. The physical work was actually soothing, giving her something to focus on besides the terror of the previous night. By the time Isaac and Miguel returned, the sun was setting, and Sarah had transformed the main room of the house. She had even found wildflowers growing near the well and arranged them in a chipped vase on the dining table. Isaac stopped in the doorway and stared. "Miss Fletcher, I told you to rest." "I did rest," Sarah said, wiping her hands on the apron she had found. "And then I cleaned." "Did you see the sheriff?" "We did. He was very interested to hear about Dutch Marlowe's whereabouts. There is a reward for information leading to his capture, and he said you are entitled to it since you are the one who can testify about what you saw." Sarah had not even thought about a reward. "How much?" $200, Isaac said. "That is enough to get you to California with money to spare." $200 was a fortune. It would change everything. And yet, as Sarah looked around the ranch house at the sturdy walls and the warm light spilling through the windows, she found herself hesitating. "That is wonderful news," she said, but the words felt hollow. Isaac seemed to notice her lack of enthusiasm. "You do not have to decide anything right now. The sheriff said it might be weeks before they track down Marlowe and you can collect the reward. In the meantime, you are welcome to stay here." "I cannot simply stay here without contributing," Sarah protested. "It would not be proper." "You could earn your keep," Miguel suggested, his eyes twinkling. "We could use someone who knows how to cook properly and keep a house. Isaac and we do our best, but we are just two old bachelors, you know." Isaac shot Miguel a look that clearly said he was not old, but he did not contradict the suggestion. "If you are willing, we could make it a formal arrangement. You would have your own room and we would pay you a fair wage for housekeeping and cooking. It would all be proper and respectable." Sarah considered this. It was true that she needed to earn money while she waited for the reward, and the alternative was trying to find work in Goldfield, a town full of rough miners and even rougher characters. Here, at least, she felt safe. "All right," she said. "I accept. But I insist on doing a full day's work. I will not take charity." "Fair enough," Isaac agreed, and he held out his hand. Sarah shook it, feeling the strength and warmth of his grip, and tried to ignore the way her heart skipped at the contact. The next few weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah woke early each morning to prepare breakfast for Isaac and Miguel before they headed out to work the cattle. She spent her days cleaning, mending clothes, and preparing meals. In the evenings, the three of them would eat together, and sometimes Isaac would tell stories about the ranch or the territory. Sarah learned that Isaac was 28 and had come from Missouri 5 years ago after his parents and younger sister had died in a house fire. He had been away working on a riverboat at the time, and the guilt of not being there had driven him west, searching for a fresh start. "Old Tom saved my life," Isaac told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Miguel had already retired to the bunkhouse, leaving them alone. "Not just by giving me this ranch, but by giving me a purpose. Before I met him, I was just drifting. Angry at the world, angry at myself. He taught me that the best way to honor the people we have lost is to build something that would make them proud." Sarah understood that kind of loss. She told Isaac about her own father, a schoolteacher who had died of pneumonia. "He always wanted me to have an education, to see the world. Instead, I ended up as a housekeeper in Tucson, barely scraping by." "You are not just a housekeeper," Isaac said softly. "You are brave and strong and resourceful. You survived something that would have broken most people." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I survived because you helped me. If you had not been there." "But I was there," Isaac interrupted, "and I am glad I was." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to deep indigo. Sarah found herself acutely aware of Isaac's presence beside her, of the way the fading light played across his features, of the strength in his weathered hands resting on his knees. She was falling in love with him. The realization struck her with the force of a lightning bolt, and she almost gasped aloud. How had this happened? When had it happened? Was it the first moment she had looked into his kind eyes, or had it been a gradual thing, built from 100 small moments of consideration and care? It did not matter when, Sarah supposed. The fact remained that she was in love with Isaac Xanders, and she had no idea what to do about it. The problem was that Sarah had no way of knowing if Isaac felt the same. He was unfailingly kind to her, but he was kind to everyone. He treated her with respect and consideration, but that was just his nature. She could not read anything romantic in his behavior, and the thought of making a fool of herself by confessing her feelings was unbearable. So Sarah kept her feelings to herself and threw herself into her work. She experimented with new recipes, using the supplies Isaac brought back from his trips to Goldfield. She sewed new curtains for the windows and patched the bullet holes in the walls properly. She even helped Miguel in the garden, learning to coax vegetables from the stubborn desert soil. Isaac noticed her efforts and seemed genuinely appreciative. "I have not eaten this well in years," he said one evening after a particularly successful attempt at apple pie. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother," Sarah said. "Before she died, she taught me everything she knew. She always said a woman who could cook and keep a good home would never want for security." "Your mother was a wise woman," Isaac said. Then, after a pause, "But you are more than just a good cook, Sarah. You are smart and capable. You could do anything you set your mind to." It was the first time he had called her by her first name without the Miss Fletcher formality, and Sarah felt a thrill run through her at the intimacy of it. "Thank you, Isaac. That means a great deal to me." Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment, Sarah thought she saw something in his gaze, a warmth that went beyond mere friendship. But then Miguel came in from outside, complaining about a coyote that had been prowling near the chicken coop, and the moment was broken. The next day, Isaac had to ride to Phoenix for supplies, a trip that would take him several days. Sarah felt his absence like a physical ache, which only confirmed what she already knew about her feelings. She tried to stay busy, but everything reminded her of him. The way his coffee cup sat on the shelf, the sound of his boots by the door, the faint scent of leather and sage that seemed to linger in the house. Miguel noticed her distraction and gave her a knowing look. "You miss him," he said. It was not a question. Sarah considered denying it, but what was the point? "Is it that obvious? To me, yes. But I am old and I notice things." Miguel smiled gently. "He misses you too, I think. When he is away, he always asks about you first thing when he returns." "He is just being polite," Sarah protested, but her heart leaped at the suggestion. "Isaac is many things, but he is not just polite," Miguel said. "He cares about you, señorita. I see it in the way he looks at you when you are not watching." Sarah wanted desperately to believe him, but she was afraid to hope. "Even if that were true, I am only here temporarily. Once the sheriff catches Dutch Marlowe and I get my reward money, I will be leaving for California." "Will you?" Miguel asked. "Or is that just what you tell yourself because you are afraid?" The question haunted Sarah for the rest of the day. Was she afraid? Yes, she admitted to herself. She was terrified. Terrified of caring too much, of being hurt, of losing someone else she loved. It was easier to plan for California, to keep her heart guarded, than to risk everything on something as uncertain as love. But as the days passed and Isaac remained away, Sarah realized that it was too late for caution. She had already fallen. The only question now was whether she had the courage to do anything about it. Isaac returned on the fourth day, his wagon loaded with supplies and his face tired from the long journey. Sarah met him in the yard, and the smile that lit his features when he saw her made her heart sing. "Sarah," he said, climbing down from the wagon, "it is good to be home. Home." The words settled over her like a warm blanket. "It is good to have you back," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That evening, after the supplies had been unloaded and dinner had been eaten, Isaac asked Sarah to take a walk with him. They strolled out past the barn, where the evening air was cool and sweet with the scent of hay and horses. "I did a lot of thinking while I was away," Isaac said, his hands in his pockets as they walked. "About the ranch, about the future, about what I want my life to look like." Sarah's pulse quickened. "And what did you decide?" Isaac stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes were dark and serious. "I decided that I am tired of being alone. Tom left me this ranch, and I will always be grateful for that, but land and cattle are not enough. I want to build something more, a family, a real home." "That sounds wonderful," Sarah managed, though her throat was tight. Was he trying to tell her he was courting someone? The thought made her feel ill. "Sarah, I know you have plans to go to California. I know you have a whole life waiting for you there. But before you go, I need to tell you something." He took a deep breath. "These past weeks, having you here, have been the happiest I have been in 5 years. You have brought light and warmth to this house, and not just because you are a good cook and housekeeper. You have brought joy. Every morning I wake up looking forward to seeing your smile. Every evening I come in from the fields knowing you will be there, and I realized, somewhere along the way, that I have fallen in love with you." Sarah stared at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You love me." "I do," Isaac said simply. "I love you, Sarah Fletcher. I know it is too soon, and I know I have no right to ask you to change your plans for me, but I had to tell you before you left. I could not let you go without knowing how I feel." Joy exploded in Sarah's chest, so intense it was almost painful. "Isaac, I do not have to go to California. I mean, I thought I did, but that was before I came here, before I met you." She reached out and took his hand, marveling at how right it felt. I have fallen in love with you too. I think I started falling the first moment you caught me on your porch. You made me feel safe when I thought I would never feel safe again. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. How could I not love you?" Isaac's face transformed with wonder and relief. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her as though she were something precious and fragile. "Are you sure? I do not want you to give up your dreams for me." "My dreams were just escape," Sarah said, leaning into his embrace. "Running from grief and loneliness. But this is real. This is a life I want to build with you." Isaac drew back just enough to cup her face in his hands. "Then stay, not as my housekeeper but as my wife. Marry me, Sarah. Let us build that future together." "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." When Isaac kissed her, it felt like coming home, like finding the place she was always meant to be. Sarah wrapped her arms around his neck, ignoring the twinge in her healing shoulder, and kissed him back with all the love and hope and gratitude in her heart. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in Goldfield. Miguel stood as witness, along with the sheriff and his wife, who had befriended Sarah during her visits to town. Sarah wore a simple blue dress that the sheriff's wife had helped her sew, and Isaac wore his best suit, looking almost uncomfortable in the formal clothes. But when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, and when he slipped the gold band onto her finger, Sarah felt tears of joy slip down her cheeks. "I promise to protect you and cherish you for all my days," Isaac said, his eyes locked on hers. "You came into my life when I did not even know I needed you, and you have made me whole. I love you, Sarah, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Sarah whispered. "You are my safe haven, Isaac, my home. I love you with everything I am." The first months of married life were an adjustment, but a happy one. Sarah threw herself into making the ranch house truly their home, adding little touches that made it warm and inviting. Isaac built her a proper kitchen garden and surprised her one day with 3 laying hens, so she could have fresh eggs. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, learning the rhythms and patterns of married life. Sarah had never known such contentment. Even the hard work of ranch life felt meaningful, because she was building something with the man she loved. Miguel moved into the newly built foreman's house, giving the newlyweds privacy, but he remained a constant presence in their lives, teaching Sarah about the ranch and regaling her with stories about Isaac's early days in Arizona. The reward money came through 6 months after the wedding, when Dutch Marlowe was finally captured in New Mexico. $200 was deposited in Sarah's name at the Goldfield Bank, a small fortune that gave her a sense of security she had never had before. "What do you want to do with it?" Isaac asked her that evening. Sarah had been thinking about this. "I want to use some of it to improve the ranch. Maybe we could buy more breeding stock, expand the herd, and I would like to save some for the future, for our family." Isaac's eyes lit up at the word family. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" Sarah took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "I am saying that come spring, you are going to be a father." Isaac whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. "A baby," he kept saying. "We are going to have a baby." That winter was harsh, but Sarah barely noticed, cocooned in the warmth of Isaac's love and the excitement of the coming child. She knitted tiny clothes and sewed soft blankets while Isaac built a cradle from oak wood, carving it with careful precision. Miguel was nearly as excited as they were, already planning to teach the child to ride and rope. "A new generation," he said happily. "This is what the ranch needs." Sarah's pregnancy was not easy. She was sick for the first few months and exhausted for most of the rest. But Isaac was endlessly patient and supportive, bringing her tea when she was nauseous, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings, and reading to her from the newspaper when she was too tired to do anything but rest. "You are going to be a wonderful father," Sarah told him one evening as they sat together, his hand resting on her growing belly. "I hope so," Isaac said quietly. "I want to be the kind of father my father was, patient and kind and always there." "You will be," Sarah assured him. "You already are." The baby came in early April, during a fierce spring storm that battered the ranch with wind and rain. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah feared she would not survive it. But the midwife from Goldfield was experienced and capable, and Isaac refused to leave her side, holding her hand and whispering words of encouragement even when she screamed at him to go away. Finally, as dawn broke and the storm subsided, their son was born. He came into the world wailing, his tiny fists waving indignantly, and Sarah fell in love for the second time in her life. "He is perfect," Isaac breathed, tears streaming down his face as he held his son for the first time. "He is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas, after old Tom Brennan, and the baby thrived from his first day. He had Isaac's dark hair and Sarah's blue eyes, and he quickly became the center of their universe. Miguel doted on little Thomas, carving him toys and singing him Spanish lullabies. Sarah had never seen the old foreman so happy, and she was grateful that their child would grow up surrounded by so much love. The years that followed were full and rich. Thomas grew into a curious, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, learning to ride almost before he could walk. When he was 3, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Lily, a sweet-tempered child with her mother's gentle nature and her father's determination. The ranch prospered under Isaac's management. The herd grew, and they hired 2 more hands to help with the work. Sarah's careful management of the household finances meant they were able to save money and invest in improvements. They built a new barn, dug a deeper well, and fenced the southern pasture. But more than the material success, it was the love that filled their home that made Sarah grateful every day for that terrifying night when she had stumbled onto Isaac's porch seeking refuge. She had been running from death and found life instead. She had been searching for safety and found love. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Lily was 4, Sarah stood on the porch watching her children play in the yard while Isaac repaired a fence nearby. Miguel was teaching Thomas to throw a rope, and Lily was picking wildflowers, her small hands gentle with the delicate blooms. Isaac looked up from his work and caught her eye, giving her the smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. He set down his tools and walked over to the porch, sliding his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am," Sarah said simply. "How different my life could have been if I had not found this place, found you." "I am the lucky one," Isaac countered. "You brought everything good into my life. Love, family, purpose. Before you, I was just going through the motions. After you, everything had meaning." Sarah leaned into his embrace, watching their children play in the golden light of the setting sun. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had made it to California?" "No," Isaac said firmly, "because you did not. You came here instead, and that was always meant to be." "You were meant to be mine, Sarah, just as I was meant to be yours." Sarah thought about the girl she had been, frightened and alone, running through the desert with death at her heels. That girl could never have imagined this life, this happiness. But somehow in the darkness she had found her way to the light. "I love you," she said, turning in his arms to kiss him. "I will love you forever." "Forever," Isaac agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. As the years continued to pass, their family continued to grow and flourish. When Lily was 6, Sarah gave birth to another son, Samuel, a robust baby with a loud cry and an easy temperament. Miguel joked that the ranch was becoming crowded with children, but his eyes shone with happiness every time he said it. Thomas grew into a responsible young man, taking on more and more of the ranch work as he got older. He had his father's natural way with horses and cattle, and Isaac often said that the boy had been born knowing things it had taken him years to learn. Lily was quieter than her brothers, but she had a deep well of strength that showed itself in unexpected ways. She was the one who found injured animals and nursed them back to health, the one who could settle a dispute between her brothers with just a few calm words. Sarah saw herself in her daughter and was proud. Samuel was the family clown, always finding mischief and laughter in everything. He kept them all young with his endless energy and creative chaos. Isaac said he would either become a great rancher or a great con man, and Sarah laughed and hoped for the former, the ranch that had been Isaac's refuge, and then Sarah's sanctuary became a true family legacy. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, dealt with rustlers and disease, celebrated good years and persevered through hard ones. Through it all, they had each other, and that made everything possible. When Miguel grew too old to work, Isaac built him a small house near theirs where he could live in comfort. The old foreman remained a beloved part of their family, teaching the children Spanish songs and telling them stories about the old days. When he died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, they buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch he had loved, and the whole family mourned. Sarah's cousin in California had written to her over the years, and they maintained a friendly correspondence, but Sarah never regretted her choice to stay in Arizona. This was her home, these people were her family, and this life was exactly what she was meant to have. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Sarah with a trip to Phoenix. They left the children in Thomas's capable hands and spent 3 days in the growing city, staying in a fine hotel and eating in restaurants and walking arm in arm through the streets like newlyweds. "Do you remember our wedding day?" Sarah asked as they sat on a bench in the town square, watching people pass by. "Every detail," Isaac said. "You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I could not believe you had agreed to marry me." "I could not believe you had asked," Sarah countered. "I was a penniless refugee with nothing to offer." "You had everything to offer," Isaac said seriously. "Your courage, your strength, your heart. Those were the things I needed, Sarah. Those were the things that made me whole." Sarah took his hand, marveling at how it still fit perfectly in hers after 2 decades. "I came to your ranch seeking refuge, but what I found was so much more. I found home. I found love. I found myself. And I found my reason for living," Isaac said. "You and our children, you are my everything." They sat together in the afternoon sun, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that surpassed their wildest dreams. Sarah thought about that terrified girl running through the desert and wished she could go back and tell her that everything would be all right, that the darkness would give way to light, and fear would transform into love. But perhaps that girl would not have believed it. Perhaps she needed to live through every moment of fear and pain to fully appreciate the joy that awaited her. Perhaps the journey was necessary to make the destination so sweet. As the sun began to set, painting the Phoenix sky in shades of gold and crimson, Isaac stood and offered Sarah his hand. "Shall we go back to the hotel, Mrs. Xanders?" Sarah took his hand and stood, still feeling that same thrill she had felt on their wedding day at being called by his name. "Yes, Mr. Xanders. Let us go home." They returned to the ranch the next day to find everything running smoothly under Thomas's management. The boy had handled a minor crisis with one of the calves, and settled a dispute between the ranch hands with a wisdom beyond his 17 years. Sarah and Isaac exchanged proud glances, knowing their eldest was ready to take on more responsibility. As the children grew older, the dynamics of the ranch shifted. Thomas became Isaac's right hand, and together they expanded the operation, buying adjacent land when it became available and improving their breeding program. Lily surprised everyone by showing a talent for numbers and took over keeping the ranch accounts, freeing Sarah to focus on other things. Samuel, true to his nature, brought innovation and creativity to the ranch. He was the one who suggested they try raising sheep alongside the cattle, and though Isaac was skeptical at first, it proved to be a profitable venture. He also had a talent for breaking horses that rivaled his father's, and people from neighboring ranches began bringing their difficult animals to him. Sarah found herself with more time as the children took on adult responsibilities, and she used it to help the community. She started a small school in Goldfield, teaching children whose parents could not afford formal education. She also organized the ranch wives in the area to support each other, creating a network of friendship and mutual aid that strengthened the whole community. Isaac supported all her endeavors, proud of the woman who had come so far from the frightened refugee he had first met. He often told people the story of how they had met, though he never mentioned the violence of that night. Instead, he focused on Sarah's courage and how she had fought to survive. "My wife is the bravest person I know," he would say, and Sarah would blush and protest, but secretly she was pleased. The years brought changes to Goldfield as well. The mining boom brought more people, and the town grew from a rough collection of buildings into a proper community with churches, schools, and even a small hospital. The railroad came through when Samuel was 15, connecting them to the wider world in ways that had previously been unimaginable. Thomas fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited girl named Emma who could ride as well as any man and was not afraid of hard work. They married when Thomas was 21, and Isaac built them a house on the far side of the property, keeping the family close while giving the young couple their privacy. Sarah adored her daughter-in-law, who reminded her of herself at that age, full of determination and dreams. When Emma gave birth to Isaac and Sarah's first grandchild, a little girl they named Rose, Sarah felt her heart expand in ways she had not thought possible. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Sarah marveled at the circle of life, at how blessing built upon blessing. This child would grow up in safety and security, surrounded by love, never knowing the fear and deprivation that had marked Sarah's early years. That alone felt like a victory. Lily, ever the quiet one, surprised them all by falling in love with a doctor who came to Goldfield to set up practice. Marcus was a gentle man with a passion for helping people, and he treated Lily like the precious gift she was. They married when she was 19 and moved to town, where Lily helped Marcus run his practice while continuing to manage the ranch accounts. Samuel was the last to settle down, waiting until he was 25 to marry a widow with 2 young children. Rebecca had lost her husband to a mining accident, and she and Samuel bonded over their shared losses and their determination to build something better. Sarah was moved by how naturally Samuel stepped into the role of father to Rebecca's children, showing them the same patient love that Isaac had shown him. As Isaac and Sarah moved into their later years, they gradually turned over more of the ranch operation to Thomas and Samuel. They did not retire completely. Isaac still rode out to check on the cattle most days, and Sarah still kept the main house running smoothly, but they allowed themselves more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the land they had built together, and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes they reminisced about the old days, about Miguel and old Tom Brennan, about the early years of their marriage when they had been young and uncertain. "Do you have any regrets?" Isaac asked her one evening. They were both in their 50s now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined by years of sun and wind and laughter. Sarah considered the question carefully. "I regret the caravan," she said slowly. "I regret that those people died, but I do not regret anything that came after. Every choice I made after that night led me to you, to our children, to this life. How could I regret that?" "I am glad you feel that way," Isaac said, reaching for her hand, "because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. You are woven into every part of me, Sarah. You always will be." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Sarah thought about the long journey that had brought her here, about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. Every hardship had been worth it for this moment, for this life, for this love. The ranch continued to thrive under the next generation's management. Thomas proved to be an even better rancher than Isaac, with innovative ideas and a head for business that took them to new heights of success. Samuel's sheep operation became known throughout the territory, and ranchers came from miles around to buy his breeding stock. Lily and Marcus became pillars of the Goldfield community, with Marcus's practice growing to serve patients from several surrounding towns. They had 3 children who were close in age to Thomas and Emma's growing brood, and family gatherings were loud, chaotic, and filled with love. Sarah and Isaac became the beloved patriarch and matriarch of a sprawling family that included not just their children and grandchildren, but the ranch hands who had worked for them for years and were treated like family, the neighbors who came to them for advice and support, and the countless people in Goldfield who had benefited from their generosity and kindness. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There were more than 40 people present, from tiny babies to grown men and women with families of their own. They roasted several steers, and Sarah made her famous apple pies, and there was music and dancing late into the night. At one point, Thomas stood and raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "who taught me everything I know about love, hard work, and family. You built this ranch with your own hands, but more importantly, you built a legacy of kindness and strength that will outlast all of us. Thank you for everything you have given us." Sarah felt tears stream down her face as everyone cheered and raised their glasses. Isaac wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close, and she leaned into him, overwhelmed with gratitude for the life they had built together. As the years continued to pass, Sarah and Isaac grew older but not apart. If anything, they grew closer, more in tune with each other's thoughts and needs. They developed a shorthand communication that needed few words, a deep understanding born of decades together. Isaac's knees began to bother him, making it harder to ride for long hours, and Sarah's hands grew stiff with arthritis, making delicate work difficult. But they adapted, finding new ways to contribute and stay active. Isaac mentored the younger ranchers, sharing the wisdom of his experience, and Sarah taught her granddaughters to cook and sew and manage a household. When Isaac turned 65, he officially handed over the ranch to Thomas, though everyone knew he would never truly retire. The land was in his blood, just as it was now in his children's blood. The Xanders Ranch had become known throughout Arizona as a model operation, and that was due in no small part to the foundation Isaac and Sarah had built. Sarah's hair had gone completely silver, and Isaac joked that she looked like an angel. He still looked at her the way he had on their wedding day, with love and wonder and deep appreciation. She still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her, even after all these years. "We have had a good life, haven't we?" Isaac said one evening. They were 70 now, both of them feeling the weight of their years but still sharp and engaged with the world. "The best life," Sarah agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if you had made it to California?" Isaac asked. It was a variation on a question he had asked before, but the answer had never changed. "No," Sarah said firmly, "because that life never existed. This life here with you, this was always my destiny. I was always meant to be yours." Isaac reached out and cupped her weathered cheek in his palm. "And I was always meant to be yours. From the moment I caught you on that porch, I was yours." They kissed, a soft, gentle kiss that held the tenderness of decades of love. Sarah closed her eyes and remembered all the kisses that had come before, from that first passionate embrace under the stars to the quick pecks goodbye as Isaac headed out to work each morning. Each one had been a small, perfect moment, a building block in the structure of their love. As they moved into their 70s and then their 80s, Sarah and Isaac became the heart of their family in a different way. They were the ones everyone came to with problems and questions, the ones who held the family history and passed it down to the younger generations. They told stories about the old days, about survival and hardship and the triumph of love over adversity. Their great-grandchildren would climb onto their laps and beg for stories, and Sarah would tell them about running through the desert while Isaac would describe building the ranch from nothing. Together they painted a picture of a different time, a harder time, but also a time when people's character was tested and proven. "Your great-grandmother is the bravest person I ever met," Isaac would tell the children, and Sarah would shake her head and say it was not bravery, just necessity. But the children knew better. They could see the strength in their great-grandmother's eyes, the steel beneath the gentle exterior. They understood that she had faced darkness and emerged into light, and that journey had shaped not just her life but the lives of everyone who came after. When Isaac died at the age of 86, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Sarah beside him as she had been for nearly 60 years. He had lived a full, rich life, surrounded by love and family, and he had died knowing he was leaving behind a legacy that would endure. Sarah mourned him deeply, feeling as though part of her own soul had been torn away. But she did not break. She had survived too much to break now. Instead, she carried on, holding the family together as she had always done, providing stability and love in the midst of grief. She lived another 4 years, spending them surrounded by the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her. She taught them everything she could, passing down not just practical skills but wisdom about life and love and perseverance. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch of the house she and Isaac had shared, looking out over the ranch they had built together, and she would talk to him as though he were still beside her. She would tell him about the children's accomplishments, about the ranch's successes, about how much she missed him and how much she looked forward to seeing him again. When Sarah Fletcher Xanders died at the age of 90, peacefully in her sleep just as Isaac had, she was surrounded by 3 generations of family. They buried her next to Isaac on the hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land they had loved and the family they had created. The Xanders ranch continued to thrive for generations, each one building on the foundation that Isaac and Sarah had laid. The story of how they met became family legend, told and retold until it took on an almost mythical quality. The frightened young woman seeking refuge and the cowboy who became her safe haven, 2 souls who found each other in the darkness and built a life filled with light. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand on that same porch where Sarah had first collapsed into Isaac's arms and look out over the thriving ranch, and they would understand that everything they had, everything they were, came from the courage and love of two remarkable people who had refused to give up on each other or on their dreams. The house still stood, carefully maintained and cherished, with Sarah's touches evident in every room. The kitchen where she had cooked thousands of meals. The parlor where she had sewn and read and played with her children. The bedroom where she and Isaac had shared 60 years of nights, building a partnership that had sustained them through every challenge. And though Sarah and Isaac were gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of the ranch, passed down through the generations in the values they had lived by and the example they had set. They had proven that love could triumph over fear, that courage could turn tragedy into blessing, and that two people committed to each other could build something that would last forever. Sarah had come to Isaac's ranch seeking refuge, running from death and terror with nowhere else to turn. And in that desperate moment, she had found not just safety but everything she had ever needed. Isaac had given her shelter, but more than that, he had given her his heart, his name, and a future she had never dared to dream of. In return, Sarah had given Isaac the family and love he had been searching for, filling his life with purpose and joy. Together they had built something extraordinary, not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The Wild West had been a hard, unforgiving place, but it had also been a place where new beginnings were possible, where people could reinvent themselves and build the lives they wanted. For Sarah and Isaac, it had been the backdrop for a love story that transcended time, a testament to the power of two hearts finding each other against all odds. Their story ended not with tragedy but with triumph, not with separation but with eternal togetherness. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left behind a legacy that would inspire generations. And somewhere, in the quiet moments when the wind whispered through the mesquite trees and the sun set in brilliant colors over the Arizona desert, you could almost feel their presence still, watching over the land and the family they had cherished, together forever, as they had always been meant to be.